graduated, elevated. Now it's my time to shine, yeah, let's go. Major moves, power moves, take it to the top one time, non-stop.
I love your response, and it's got me thinking. And there's one person that I can think of who's well known, and I think he's respected. And from what you're saying, I'm thinking of him. So that's Gandhi. He was part of the elite, in my opinion, and he well educated abroad, but came back, and he looked at the situation, and he had to come up with ABCD to make it work, which is not the same as what you're saying, but could be similar. And, looking at Gandhi's work and the way we respect him for what he did, would you say some of the problems, they stem back from some of the movements at the time, and also how some of the information has been misinterpreted? Because, with history, we're only given what we should know, not the actual reality in terms of the full picture. And I guess my question is, do you think some of the systematic challenges that some of these groups are facing, they stem back to some of the movements that we had from the elite who had gone to Oxford University and came back and wanted power and authority? I'm not saying that's Gandhi.
But it's absolutely right. 500% right. I was just at a workshop on caste and diplomacy, which is a wonderful group of people who are, steering this work in the field of international relations, in the field of political science and diplomacy. So I was very much not, I was very much an imposter in that community, but they were very kind to sort of create space for me. But the work they do is exactly this. They tried to look at the people who were the faces of the Indian independence movement and sort of control they were able to wield over India's position in international diplomacy and India's lawmaking nationally. And here you think of people like Gandhi, you think of people like Nehru, you think of people like Vijay Lakshmi Pandit. And something that is common across all of these people is the fact that they fit within um, they fit within European understandings of sophistication. They were, yeah, absolutely. They were educated abroad. They were able to speak in European tongues well. They were able to speak well in English. There are, for the purposes of my presentation at the workshop, I was looking at the particular diplomats who were India's representatives to the UN around the time of our independence and around the time of the making of the UN Charter and the international covenants that I'm looking at. So Vijay Lakshmi Pandit, there are so many press clips where they say, oh, she's the best of both worlds, the East and the West, because she's from India and she's a woman wearing a sari, but she speaks in great English and she's homeschooled, educated in Switzerland. She's able to quote, she's read Hemingway. The fact that India wanted to be the face of the Asian, African, post-colonial world, but it was still not able to give up that hangover of European modernity or that hangover of European civilization. And really what this was, in a way, this was the cosmopolitan vision that was being presented abroad. And internally, what this meant was that we started to use caste vocabulary more and more and more to suppress people who were already in weaker socioeconomic positions internally, domestically. So this is why, people like Ambedkar is really who, his work Annihilation of Caste is clearly articulates from his own lived experience the life experience, the sort of subjugation that people of oppressed castes suffer in India, right? Bahujans, Dalits, the sort of repeated social subjugation processes that are afflicted on people of oppressed castes. But Ambedkar was never seen as India's face in international diplomacy. In fact, he resigned from services, saying, "I know I'm never going to be allowed to represent India abroad because of my caste." And if he was, after having been such a well-educated and someone occupying so much public space, if he also went through that fate, just imagine what happens to the others. So, like you said, it's very much a product that a process that that solidified at the time of independence, where you see this absolute dichotomy between cosmopolitanism and assimilation. So what we were doing abroad was cosmopolitanism. We wanted to show everyone that, hey, we fit in these leagues as well. Like Japan, I mean, Japan is seen more as a Western state than an Asian state. Similarly with India. And internally, what we were doing was assimilation. We were using caste, we were using civilization to assimilate everyone, not to include minorities, to assimilate minorities, to make them look like everyone else, behave like everyone else. And that's the process that continues today. And it happens regardless of political party. It's not about the views of the political party anymore. No one is able to give up on that vocabulary. Everyone does it. Every single political party does it. So there is a, you really need to excavate the histories and the contributions of oppressed castes in India. And that's work that's only now starting to happen.
Yeah, and funny enough, I was actually at a conference and there were a few of our colleagues coming from North India, and they went to indigenous parts of India that haven't been really touched. And like you were saying, there were nomads as well there. And they were talking about how, the oppression and the language and the cultural differentiation is still a big part. And I think one of the examples that they used, it was a group, I think they were from North India, and the children, by law, they can choose whom they marry, and they can get married at like 16 and have children. But in terms of career, money, all the things that you need to build a home, genuinely not there. But then the presenter said they have a choice. And the question then became, but what choices do they have? Because no one has really educated them about anything else except for what they know. And they are secluded and no one goes there. But yet they're not brought into the rest of the society in a way. So these challenges, they are there. Essentially, I don't know what your viewpoint is on that.
And I mean, I was just speaking to someone yesterday, and he had done some field work in Tanzania, and he was also, both of us together were sort of reflecting on, how the challenges of the pandemic were so different for people who belong to, indigenous communities or, communities who are oppressed socioeconomically in parts of Asia, parts of Africa, because for us, the pandemic was a time of mobility restriction. It was a time of great health concerns, yes, but mobility restrictions. And there was just this assumption that these mobility restrictions would continue to be only mobility restrictions for everyone else. But that's not true, because there are communities, for example, the rulers, who most of whom work as daily wage laborers. Now, if they are not able to go to work, then they're going to find alternate ways to earn daily. And if they are going to find alternate ways to earn and children are not going to school, children will also join their parents and find work. And if for 10 months or 11 months, these young children are all working, there's no incentive for them to come back to school. They already live in remote locations. They already, yeah, I mean, it's just that most governance policies seem to assume homogeneity, seem to assume that homogeneity is good. Homogeneity is liberal. It leads to ease of governance. It leads to moral, liberal societies. But liberalism is not always good, right?
I
And
agree.
and the really important thing is that communities like the Irulars don't situate themselves as liberal or illiberal. They exist in between. And policies just don't know what to do with that in between space. A policy is either liberal or it's illiberal. It can't be in between. And that automatically shows the door to the ways that so many of these communities position themselves, like just because you catch snakes and sell snake skin doesn't make you fall on the illiberal side of the spectrum at all. Like think about the moral codes, think about the social behavioral codes within these communities, which no one puts the effort to understand. So yeah, very, very, very true that that in many ways all of these policies disenfranchise these communities more using the rationales of liberalism.
But in a way, not to support businesses or to support those who are driven by capital gain. If a country is divided, they do profit, don't they? And essentially, a lot of people in senior positions, they do love, the gold or the silver, or, rupees or diamonds. And so when it comes to best interest, and this stems back, like you said, during the colonial eras and even after the independence, they were gaining financially, or whether through education their kids were able to go abroad, and and things were happening for them, whether they were a small group, they were able to influence and manipulate at the time. Which brings me to this question: meaning making, that's in your abstract. What does that mean for your research, meaning making?
Yeah, I think meaning making takes various forms, right? It's in some ways it is about how you disrupt substantive contents of certain rules or certain processes. So whether it is agricultural policy, whether it is forest policy, whether it's economic policy, whether it's relationship with land, these communities like the Irulas are constantly disrupting that, right? So if the government assumes, like if you look at all rules about indigeneity, they'll all say indigeneity is based on a special relationship with land. But now you look at this community, it was maybe in the medieval period that many of their forefathers moved to the hills. And they were all evicted from the hills and they moved to the plains. So they started mixing with other communities many, many years ago. In these semi-rural areas, they don't have any special relationship with land. That land to them is not their ancestral land. So when they dance on the land, or when they worship the land, or when they perform rituals on that land, it's not because of a special relationship with land at all. But state policy will not recognize that. So in a way, when they dance on the land, so this community, just to preface, they have this customary dance which they perform when someone is born, when someone dies, when the season changes, when there is really any occasion to celebrate or to mourn or to express. They express through music and dance. They'll like I remember during my fieldwork interactions that many of them would say, we can sing about anything. It's not fixed songs. It's not a one song that we all learn and it's passed down. Sometimes I'm upset that I don't have an identity document. I'll sing it to you. I'll sing my grief to you because it comes naturally to them to create these songs, to dance to them. But that's their way of meaning making. So for someone like me or you, we would think of meaning making as, oh, writing an article or creating a legal rule. But for this community, it's actually these cultural practices which are their ways of meaning making. So that's how they disrupt conventional understandings of conventional forms of conventional understandings of meaning making. So there is a range of illustrations of this. And the other thing is that I think what's the key takeaway from my fieldwork was that culture is often seen as a very performative thing. It's seen as music or dance or folk arts or handicrafts or something. And every year there'll be a bunch of occasions where the state will come in and it'll say, here, an exhibition of folk handicrafts or an exhibition of folk embroidery, whatever. But it's one occasion in a year where they'll suddenly, on an ad hoc basis, set up this exhibition. And they're doing it to monetize it. They're not doing it with an appreciation of the fact that these are not superficial elements. These are really core parts of the way that they articulate their cultural identity. And culture for these communities is not separate or secondary to other claims. So, the claim for land, the fact that they're asking for pakka, like cement houses, or the fact that they are asking for their subsistence livelihoods back, or the fact that they are asking for rights for their knowledge of traditional medicine, These are not separate from their culture. These come from their culture. The way that they interact amongst themselves, it comes from their culture. So you can't treat land as separate from culture. You can't treat agricultural practices as separate from culture. But government does that. But for these communities, it's all together. It's an intersected mess. It's a ball with
Yeah.
all of these intersections, and culture is at the center of all of these demands. So that is again a big way in which these communities challenge the meaning making rubrics that you see in state discourse.
No, thank you so much for your well put together response. And I think just to add on to what you said to challenge those who be watching this video is it's just like Black History Month. It's only 1 month. Why?
Yeah.
I swear Black people have 12 months like everybody else. And you know, don't come from me, whoever's watching it and they want to raise their point. No. You know, it's just like, why do I only have 1 month to celebrate my Blackness? Quite frankly, I'm brown.
Exactly.
Just saying.
Exactly. Yeah.
But you know, that's a debate and a topic on its own that we could go into. But it's just to show the juxtaposition of what you're saying, really, and just to challenge those who are at home, because someone can work with you on the next paper,
And
essentially.
just to add that all of these sorts of exercises are not only performative, they also are entrenched in capitalism, right?
Mhm.
So if you look at universities, universities profit from Black History Month. Those profits are not going to grassroots movements led by Black people. Those profits are being reaped by neoliberal universities who are asking these Black students to pay a shit ton of money to study in these universities. So you see that all of these performative exercises, I remember there's a scholar called Nandini Sundar who says it's propertyless socialism, right? It's a farce. You
Yeah.
have this one occasion where you're trying to show that you're liberal and that you're sensitive to diversity, but where is the diversity? Doesn't translate to any substantial change, any epistemic change, any corrective justice. None of that is happening. It's all just feeding the existing capitalist models.
I love that, which moves me on to the
Yeah.
next question, which is about equality, diversity, and
Right.
inclusion. Right. So, in your opinion, in terms of current situ around the world, do you think all of this inclusion and diversity and pushing for women's rights to be in CEO positions, do you think is just because, quite frankly, I think I've read a few things on the internet and I've seen that women were running the world during World War One, nothing collapsed. And then, in my opinion, I feel like the men came back and they were like, we're useless. So, what can we do? Let's come up with a model. And then it started. That's my opinion. So, in your opinion, what are your thoughts on that?
Right. I mean, I think both of us share in the suffering of being people of color in an otherwise really white space, whether it's universities, whether it's, society outside of university, and all of this DEI. I often have apprehensions because it reduces decolonization diversity to a metaphor, right? As
Mhm.
Tuck and Yang have constantly said. Um, and that is a big worry that diversity is often understood in a very tokenistic way. It's not about having one person of color in a cohort of PhD students and placing my photo at the website of the university or using my pictures in publicity pamphlet. It's not about that. It's really about, I think Hierophilus says this about, it's not about creating seats at the table, but it's about breaking the legs of the table and putting up a new table. In other words, it's actually about using new vocabularies
Yes.
from the bottom up, which
Mhm.
means that in my case, if I'm doing field work, it's not about imposing other Western vocabularies, grammars of rights or justice or culture, whatever it be, in English, first of all,
Mhm.
or in an academic way, but to reverse it, speak in a language uh, which is not English, speak in the language of the community. It's on me to learn the language of the community and do fieldwork in this language. It's on me to place this language as the center and to shift the power balance. Place this language as the center and use English as the language of translation. It's on me to find new ways in which these communities are speaking and bring them up rather than constantly try to see how these terms that the community uses in Tamil are equivalents of terms I know in English, right? So it's actually about changing vocabulary completely as opposed to fitting people of color into your vocabularies. That is decolonizing. Decolonizing is a larger movement. I mean, it's about restitution of land, it's about lots of very big things. But on our very local levels, it's about thinking of these small ways in which you can shift the center of power. You can shift the center of decision making, not not at a Western time zone or in a Western grammar or in a Western structure, but in this vernacular structure, in this vernacular grammar. Um, and in self-determined ways. So it's not for me to say to the community, hey, why don't you speak in Tamil? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
if they do decide, then if they want to speak in English, sure. But who am I to say that? So don't impose worldviews in the name of diversity. Allow decolonizing to happen, which is just vernacular ways of thinking and knowing to come up, which universities really struggle to do, which conferences really struggle to do. Like, I mean, just a small instance. Last week, I organized a workshop with some friends here, and you realize then, and we had lots of scholars from, Global South locations coming
Why
to join
wasn't
us.
I invited? I'm joking.
Good note. Um, and you just realize that the institutions here
Mhm,
have are so normalized to these restrictions. It's
mhm,
impossible to find a person of color visa to come and present here. It's
mhm,
impossible to, I mean, it's become impossible. It's not really impossible, but it's so difficult to organize a conference in a way where you're not disadvantaging people who are not in Europe and joining online. You expect people in Singapore and Brazil to join at 2 a.m. their time for a conference. That's ridiculous. But that's how Western academia is conditioned to be. Like, oh, we start at 10 a.m. GMT or 10 a.m. CEST, and you're wondering what happens if people who are living elsewhere and joining remotely, have you thought about their timings? Or just the conferences assuming that everyone must speak in English. It could very well be that someone's more comfortable, someone who has brilliant academic ideas is more comfortable speaking in Vietnamese or in Arabic or in Brazilian Portuguese. Then you should have the infrastructure. If you have all of this money, at least create the infrastructure for people to think in the ways that they want to think as opposed to fitting in your model. So just organizing that conference made me realize that, it's battle after battle of trying to
mhm.
break through these barriers that are so entrenched.